Hello everyone! Today we are continuing our Search XT series with part 1 of how to create a kick drum sound by adjusting parameters within Search XT. The end result for today will sound something like this. This isn't entirely what a kick drum sound used to sound like in the early electronic days, but it's a nice point to actually stop and reiterate what I did to actually achieve the sound. And in the next part, we will actually sculpt this sound further to actually get a really nice and punchy kick drum sound that has a more attack than this one and actually sounds more intense and boomy. Let's dive right in. Here we are right within Search XT. And as I said last time, we don't care what DAW you're running this in, or if you're running it under Windows or Mac. All of these things that we would do in just a second can be followed along no matter which operating system or DAW you're using, as long as you replace the appropriate keystrokes by just replacing Control with the appropriate alternative on Mac, and so on and so forth. But that's not all. If you find a synthesizer that is not Search XT, you will, however, most likely be able to follow along as well, because this is a really simple example and most synthesizers work the same way. What we're doing is creating a kick drum sound out of this, which is the inner patch of Search XT, which gets loaded by default if you just open it up, and we get to the kick drum sound that you just heard in the intro. And here's how we do it. And I would try to make clear how a synthesizer actually works. Every synthesizer sound that you know and love, from the good old 80s to modern synthesizer sounds, starts with at least one noise coming from an oscillator. An oscillator back in the day was an electronic device which would generate a wave in kind of shape, which then creates an electronic sound. An oscillator can have different kind of shapes. It can be a sawtooth sound, which is this. It can also be a sine wave. It can be so many different things. And we have to decide on what it is actually about to be. And we don't want to have a sawtooth here because a kick drum usually gets synthesized out of a sine wave. So we will change that. And as I've told you in the last video, we will get to the oscillator section by just pressing Alt full stop a few times.
Search synth controls grouping, global controls grouping, oscillator number grouping, must one select.
So that is the first oscillator, and this is the one that we need here.
Oscillator type button classic.
So we press tab once, and here is the oscillator type, and we will just change that to our sine wave now by pressing enter.
Search XT window.
And using down arrow a few times.
Classic modern convertible window, sine.
Here we got sine, press that, and now our sound sounds like this. This is obviously not a kick drum, but we now have to sculpt it further. We basically have a stone in front of us, and now we need to remove things to make it look like we actually want it to look. That is why we are now using the art of subtractive synth, because we are subtracting things until it sounds the way we want it to sound. First of all, the most obvious thing that comes to mind is this sounds like a note and not like a kick drum, and it's much too long. No kick drum is that long. And we will make sure to make it shorter. And this can be done with the help of a modulation. Here's a little bit of background. If we want to make things longer or shorter or things like that, there isn't something like a long or length control in Search XT, and most likely not in other synthesizers. But the way you do this is you control the amplitude, which is the volume of the sound. Make it shorter means that you, at some point, probably a really early point, you will just reduce the amplitude to a really low value, most likely 0 or minus infinity if you're in an analog world. That means that nothing will be audible anymore. Now, We can do this in a few ways, but here's the easiest way that we would follow in this tutorial. The mixer section contains an amplitude control, which we can use. Let's use Alt and full stop.
Mixer controls grouping.
Now that we are here, let's see what we've got.
New checkbox not checked toggle.
Okay, that is pressing tab once, but the previous control is actually what we need, so we will press Shift Tab again.
Volume slider 0.00 dB adjust.
The slider is currently at the topmost position, which we can find out by pressing Home. It doesn't get higher than the 0 dB here. So this is obviously the topmost value. It can, however, go as low as
dB.
minus infinity dB. I will now do, for a reason that I will explain to you in just a second, change the volume to minus 100 on the slider by just hitting enter.
New value edit selected 0.00 dB.
And entering minus 100.
That was 0. Minus 100. Mixer controls grouping. Volume slider minus 100.00 dB.
So this is the volume, and we want to automate this because remember, we want to make the sound shorter, and making something shorter means that we need to reduce the volume to 0 at some point. How do we do this? Because this is just a slider. How can we decide when it is actually going to get quiet? And this is done by using a modulation. A modulation means that at some point of time we're going to change a value. By default, a modulation is a curve. That means it will repeat itself. Kind of like a wobbling sound effect that you probably know from kind of a few synths. This is a curve. This is an LFO, a low frequency oscillator. So it's oscillating as well. It's going up and down and up and down and up and down all the time. And modulation is exactly the same thing, except that we obviously don't want it to go up and down all the time. So we will have to make sure that this doesn't happen, but it will only happen once. But it's the same idea. So we need something that changes our value over time. And we can do this by linking this parameter to a modulator. And this is important to know. You can link everything in Search to a parameter this way and can modulate it over time if you want to. It doesn't matter if it's the octave, the pitch, the volume. You can just link everything to a modulator in Search. To link something to a modulator, you press Shift F10 on the parameter that you actually want to modulate.
Search XT window.
Here we go. And we now use the down arrow.
OST1 volume, open manual, edit value, add modulation from collapsed.
That is what we want. We want to add modulation from.
Search XT window, macros collapsed.
We don't want to use macros. We will get to the explanation what this is in one of the later videos.
Voice LFOs collapsed.
We want a voice LFO. The other option would be
scene LFOs collapsed.
A scene LFO. Now here's the difference, although that's not really important for now. A voice LFO controls the voice, means one of the oscillators, which then creates or removes things. You put a filter on top of it, everything that goes into a voice oscillator. However, a scene LFO can control the entire scene. So all the three oscillators going together, getting filtered, running through modulators and everything, they will at the end run into a scene LFO if that is what you want. And you can then globally control parameters which affect all of the voices within this scene at once. But we obviously only want to control this oscillator, so we will select the voice LFO.
Voice LFOs collapsed.
Open that.
Search XT window, voice LFO1 collapsed.
Voice LFO1.
Search XT window, voice LFO1.
And we will select the very first entry.
FX.
Now, for another reason that I will explain to you in just a second, I will enter 100 here.
Wow, 0.
And hit enter. This is the input box that asks you by which amount you actually want to modulate all the time. So we are at minus 100 and I'm saying that we want to modulate to 100 here. So this means that the curve will start at minus 100, will go up to 100, will then go down to minus 100 and up to 100 again all the time. Or as often as we actually want. I will show you in just a second. I will just enter 100 here.
100, mixer controls group.
And press enter, and that is it. We will now hear how it sounds now. That is exactly it, right? It starts at minus 100, goes up by 100, ending at 0, and then it starts to go down again and comes up again at a speed of 1 modulation per second. So it's 1 hertz. It's 1 move per second, basically. Now that is obviously not what we want, but this is where we need to get started. Now we need to change what our modulation looks like. What we need the modulation to do, other than the thing that it's doing right now, going up and going down all the time, is to just go down and not go up. But we need to make it silent. So we want to make it go to minus 100 dB, which is silent. And we want to make it go down to this minus 100 decibel after a certain amount of time. But we need to start at minus 100 first, because otherwise we can't tell it to modulate somewhere, because we're already at the highest possible value. This is not what we want, right? We wanted to just do this once, and we wanted to do this without going up first. We want to go down. We will have to change the modulation. And to do this, we go into the modulation section. I will use a shortcut trick that I've demonstrated in the last video already. I will press Alt-M and then quickly escape right after.
Modulator.
Now, I linked this to LFO1, so I will press Shift-Tab a few times.
Tag arms in LFO4 modulator. Tag arms in LFO3 tag arms in LFO2 modulator.
So I'm on LFO2 now, and it's important to know that all the buttons that come next will be the buttons related to LFO1, because they, in the tab order, follow after LFO1. So I need to press 3 times Shift-Tab.
Tag arm select button.
And this select button is related to
LFO1 modulator.
This LFO1 modulator.
Select button.
So press tab and hit enter on this.
LFO controls grouping. Scene LFO1 rate slider 1.000 Hz adjust.
I here can see that we've got a rate of 1 Hz. If I just turn this down to a really low value,
0.008 Hz.
0.008 Hz is really, 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 really slow. So if I now play things, it's really slowly coming in, right? So the other way around, if I just hit enter and say something like 5 Hz,
New 5 LFO
and I'll play, things are faster. So this is the speed of the curve that is the modulation. But we don't want this to be an actual repetitive curve. We just want this to be an envelope, starting at a point and ending on a point, and nothing in between. This is how we do it. We press Shift-Tab a few times,
LFMS step sequencer envelope radio button not checked.
and we will make it an envelope instead of a sine wave, which it currently is. So we will just press enter on envelope,
Envelope active.
which will change the curve form of our envelope. Now it sounds like this. It starts at full volume, because that is what the envelope does. It will start at the highest possible value and modulate down, but our parameters right now don't specify where it's meant to go, so we'll not modulate anywhere unless we change the parameters, and we will do that right now.
Step MSEG rate formula.
So we tab a few times.
Scene LFO1 rate slider 5.0.
We know the rate already. It's important to know that as soon as you change to envelope, the rate doesn't matter anymore. So tab a few times more.
Scene LFO1 phase slider 0.00% adjust.
Phase is not important right now.
Scene LFO1 amplitude slider 100.00% adjust.
We will keep it at full volume.
Scene LFO1 deform slider 0.00% adjust.
We don't want to deform anything.
Scene LFO1 trigger mode grouping select. Key trigger radio button checked.
As soon as you have an envelope, the only trigger that is available is key trigger. Key trigger means that it depends on the note that you press on the keyboard, on the note that you play, the key. There are other options if you use a sine wave or sawtooth or whatever. Maybe we will demonstrate those in another video, which will happen in the future. But right now, the only thing that is important and the only thing that actually works with envelopes is a key trigger.
Scene LFO1 unipolar checkbox not checked toggle. Scene LFO1 delay slider 0.0 ms adjust.
And here we are in the parameters list on the most important parameters of the modulation. Modulation in Search XT got multiple parameters. Maybe you've heard of ADSR, which is short for attack, decay, sustain, and release. These are the 4 parameters that by default every synthesizer has, the electrical ones as well as the software ones. These are the 4 minimum elements that every synthesizer needs to have nowadays. These 4 parameters describe the attack, which is the time the synthesizer the electrical component in the original hardware required to actually get from nothing to the highest peak of the signal. The decay, which would be the time it takes to get from the peak to a lower value, to the sustain value that follows right after. The sustain, which would be the loudness of the signal that it will remain on for as long as you hold the key down, and the release, which is the speed of the sound dying away as soon as you release the key that you're holding. That is the bare minimum that every synthesizer has. However, some synthesizers, like Surge XT for example, add a few more parameters. And Surge XT starts with delay. Delay comes even before attack, which is the delay that will come before the attack actually triggers. So before the signal actually starts to rise. Like before the electrical component even turns on and starts to generate a wave that has to go from nothing to our peak value. We don't want a delay here, because if we enabled a delay, then we would basically get a sine sound before the kick drum sound actually starts. We don't want that, so we will skip delay. Let's hit tab once more.
CALFO1 attack slider 0.0 ms adjust.
So that's the attack. We don't need attack here. We don't want our curve to actually go up in volume. And we want it to start at 100% volume, right? So that is basically a drum. We don't want it to have a soft attack. We want the attack to be as punchy as possible. Don't change attack here.
CALFO1 hold slider 0.0 ms adjust.
But we want hold. Hold is another thing that got added in Surge XT and probably other synths as well. There are synths which do have more parameters than Surge XT. Hold is basically the time the sound will stay at peak signal before it actually decays to the sustain level. And we want this to be at 0.1, which would be 100 milliseconds. So let's hit enter.
New value.
And enter 0.1 here.
0.1.
And press enter.
0.
And press tab once more.
CALFO1 decay slider 1.0.
This is decay. This is the time the sound requires to actually go down to the sustain level. We will hit enter.
New.
And enter 0.1 here as well, just for demonstration.
0.1. 0.
And hit tab once more.
CALFO1 sustain slider 100.00% adjust.
So this is sustain, and it's 100%, which means that our sustain level is 100% of the maximum value that is possible. So it will remain at 100%. Hold and decay won't do anything right now because our sustain peak is just the same peak as the attack peak, means highest possible value, which I can quickly demonstrate by just holding the key. Nothing's happening. Sustain is just as high as our attack peak. So nothing is happening, nothing is changing, but by turning this down ever so slightly,
97, 20.
make it 28%. Now it should be audible. We are starting with a pretty punchy attack. The decay and hold are both 100, so it takes 200 milliseconds. 100 will remain high peak, and then it takes another 100 milliseconds to die down to 28% of the maximum peak that we reached at the very attack of the signal. But we want this to die down to 0, which is minus 100 dB as we've defined before, so we will make this
0.00%.
0%, and now it sounds like this. This is much closer to a kick drum already, right? But there's one thing missing. One not so obvious thing if you don't know how synthesizers work. I didn't know this for a really long time, but the main idea is easily audible if you slow down a synthesized kick drum by just reducing the play rate by a lot. And you will notice that what you can hear is a pitch drop. So it starts at a high pitch and it goes down to a low pitch. And we have to automate this in Surge XT too. And we can do this by adding another modulator. We need to go back to the oscillator section because we need to find the pitch control. Let's go back with Alt,
envelope, filter, mixer, oscillator controls grouping, oscillator number grouping, OST1 select.
Let's tab a few times.
Oscillator type button sign, CA OST1 octave grouping select, 0 radio button checked.
So this is octave, but that's not exactly what we want.
CA OST1 pitch slider 0.00 semitones adjust.
This is what we want. This is the pitch. Now let's see what the highest value that we can modulate to.
7.00 semitones.
Okay, 7 semitones. That's not a lot, right? So let's go back to 0, and what can we do about it? Like, a kick drum won't sound great if we just have 7 semitones to actually drop. Yeah, we can change this, and we can extend the range of the slider by pressing Shift F10.
Search XT window.
And going down.
OST1 edit value, extend range.
Oh, extend range. Hit that. And now we need to focus the control again, because sometimes Search XT is a little bit buggy.
FX, CNA OST1 pitch slider 84 point.
Oh, it's 84. That's something that you can work with, right? Let's set it back to 0. Because remember, the default value that you configure in the actual parameter should be the value that you want to land on. So if you set it to 0, then we will, in the end, land on the pitch that we are hitting on the keyboard. That is what we want to do. And the value that we had to add to the LFO configuration in just a second is the value that we want to start with. Let's hit Shift 10 to add a modulator to this.
Search XT window.
And a few arrows down.
OST1 edit value, extend range, absolute. Add modulation from collapsed.
That's what we want.
Search XT window, voice LFOs collapsed.
We want another voice LFO.
Search XT window, voice LFO2 collapsed.
We want a voice LFO2 because 1 is already in use.
Search XT window, voice LFO2, FX.
And now we are prompted to enter the value that we want to modulate from. And that is, I think it sounds pretty nice with 30. So we would just enter 30 here.
0.
Which is 30 semitones above the actual key value.
30. Oscillator control.
Awesome. Now it sounds like this. It goes up. And that is still because we have a sine wave. And a sine wave, you know, starts at the negative value and goes up. And then it goes down again and comes up again. But this time we only hear the upwards motion because our other modulation will just silence the sound before the sine wave comes down again. So this is not what we want. We want to make it an envelope again. So we press Alt-M and we escape.
Modulator.
And we use Shift-Tab a few times.
Tag arms in LFO4, tag arms in LFO3 modulator.
LFO3, remember what I said before. We now have to press 3 times more.
Tag arm select button.
And hit Enter on Select.
LFO control.
And we know from before that if we want to make this an envelope, we have to press Shift-Tab a few times.
LM step envelope sample and hot envelope.
Here we go, Enter.
Envelope active.
And now it's not a sine wave anymore, but an envelope. Let's hear it. Not doing anything because it doesn't know where to go. Let's hit Tab and Control R. Delay, attack, hold, decay, sustain, and release. In this case, we don't need all of that, but you know.
Step sequencer MSEG formula radio CNA LFO2 CNA LFO2 amplitude slider 1 CNA LFO2 deform slide CNA LFO2 trigger mode group CNA LFO2 unipolar checkbox CNA LFO2 delay slider 0.0 ms adjust. We still don't want a delay. CNA LFO2 attack slider 0.0 ms adjust.
We still don't want an attack.
CNA LFO2 hold slider 0.0 ms adjust.
This time, we actually don't want to hold.
CNA LFO2 decay slider 1.00 is adjust.
But this time, we actually want the same decay that we had before, so 100. So we will press Enter and enter 0.1.
0.1. 0.1 LFO control.
Great. And
CNA LFO2 sustain slider.
And we don't want to sustain on the maximum pitch. We want to go down. So we turn this down
0.00%.
so that we actually have a way to decay to. And now it sounds like this. Or at a slightly lower octave. Or. And we can make our life a little bit easier by just turning down the octave on the oscillator by default, which is a neat little trick. Let's go back to the oscillator category.
Envelope filter mixer oscillator control.
Here we go. Let's tab
oscillator type button sign. CNA OST1 octave grouping select 0 radio button checked.
We can change this down with the down arrow.
-1 radio, -2 radio, -3 radio button checked.
Just put the octave down by -3 by default, and now I can reach without changing my octave. And that is what we will end on today. I know that was a lot of input. We've covered oscillators, how those work and what they do, or at least a little bit. These are generators which just generate a sound which you can sculpt with modulation, with envelopes, with filters, and all the other things that you do in a subtractive synthesizer. We only covered modulations today. and only envelope modulations. But this is at least something that you can start with. And the great thing is that this sound, other than sample packs that you maybe just download, and then you think this is the sound, and now I use this and I cannot change it. I don't like it 100%, but it's good enough. No, in this case, you can just change things. You can, for example, make it ring out longer. This is rather easy to do by just changing our modulation 1, which controls the length and decay of the sound. Let's press Alt-M and Escape, and make sure to select our first LFO.
Target arm select LFO4 modulator, arm select LFO3, arm select ENV2 modulator, target arm select ENV1 modulator, select button, LFO controls.
Hit tab a few times.
C LFO1 hold slider 100 point.
Let's, for example, say we don't want 100 milliseconds, but 500.
New value is 0.5.
Let's see how it sounds now. So we've got a longer sound, but we can also turn it back to 100.
New value 0.1.
And change the decay instead.
LFO1 decay slider.
Let's make this 500.
New value 0.5.
And it sounds like this. So it's not as loud, but it rings out longer. Longer tail, right? And we can make the hold really long. Let's say 2 seconds.
New value.
This is rather hard to hear if you're listening via mobile, I guess. But you get the idea. We can control how long it's going and how long it takes to ring out. And everything is controllable via your favorite synth, Surge XT. This is how you can start to create your own kick drum sound. Feel free to experiment a little bit further and see if you can get further than me in this video, because there will be a part 2, in which point we will add more punchiness to the sound and sculpt it a little bit further. But I thought with this amount of theory going on in this demonstrative video, I thought, yeah, it would be enough to just make this part 1 video. It's already long enough, and I hope it got you a little bit interested in synthesizers in general. Don't forget, Surge XT is free. You can find the link in the video description. Just download it, install it, no matter if it's Windows or Mac, and have fun, play around with it, and see if you can follow this tutorial. And if not, then feel free to ask away in the comment section below the video. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel and make sure to stay up to date with new videos that come out almost every week. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye bye.